In this episode, we are going to create a swipe that is satisfying enough for our Fruit Ninja game, and we would learn some more things about Line 2D as well. Let's create a scene for our swipe. So it would be a 2D scene, a node 2D, inside which I would add a line 2D. I would also rename the node to something like SwipeTrail. Now let's configure line 2D. Now we are going to generate it dynamically later, but for now, to just see the effect, I'm gonna click here and increase its size to 2. So we have 2 points and we can see exactly how our line looks. Currently you can see the line is too big for an actual swipe. So I would reduce its width to something like 4 pixels or maybe a little bigger to like 6 pixels. Now you can see our edges are boxed, but for a swipe we actually want them to be rounded for both our sides, for the start as well as for the end. So I would go on our line 2D node again, and then I would go to capping and make it round, and this also round and round. Now if you see it, we have rounded edges on both our sides. Then inside our border, I would turn anti-alias to on. Now that we have our line set up, we can just go ahead and remove these points. So we would add a script to our swipe trail. Then to access our line 2D, I would add on ready var line 2D equal to line 2D. Okay, so this gives us a variable to access our line 2D through the script. Then we want to know whether the swipe is currently in progress or not. For that, we would add another variable called swiping. It would be a boolean and initial value would be set as false because when we start the game, we are not swiping at all. After that, I would add a function for our inputs. So Godot gives us an input function which captures any input that we receive. So the specific event we are interested in is the input event by mouse. So I would add here input event mouse button. And if the button is mouse button left, then we would start our swiping. So swiping equals to event dot pressed. When the button is pressed, swiping becomes true. When we release it, it becomes false. Now this is what happens when the button is pressed or released. But we also want the swipe to continue when the mouse is in motion. So I would capture that event as well. Elif event is mouse motion, and if we are swiping currently, because if we are not swiping, the event is completely useless to me. But if we are swiping, we want our line to add a point at the event's position. So basically, wherever our mouse moves, we want to add a point at that position. Now, if I run the scene, you can see if I click and drag, a point appear. You can see I can keep on drawing infinitely, and if I release it, nothing happens. Even if I press somewhere, it would just join the line. So instead of a swiper, it has become kinda like a drawing tool. So the obvious thing we want to do next is limit the line's length. We cannot let the player swipe infinitely. We need the line to disappear at some point. So let's set the line's length to something. So I would introduce a const max length. Let's say we take the value as 350. You can adjust it as per your needs, how much bigger you want the swipe to be or how much small you want the swipe to be. So to limit our length, we need to first find out what the length of our current line is. For that, I would write a function get line length, which would return me a float value. So initially, we would initialize a variable length equal to 0. Then for I in range, 1 comma line dot get point count, that is the number of points that we have added to the line, we would add the length of each point. So this might look scary at first sight, but this is quite simple. What we're doing is line dot get point at I minus 1 position. So you can see we have started from range 1. So our points are actually 0 indexed. So what this would do is get the previous point. So for our first index, I would be 1 and this would be 0. So it would get 0th point and it would find its distance to the first point. Similarly, for the next value, it would find its distance from the first point to the second point and then from the second to the third point. So this way we would get our total length and then we just return it here as return length. Now we would go back to our input event where we are adding a point. So now we can add a condition here that while get line length greater than our max length, we would remove the first point. So the point that was added at the very beginning. Line dot remove 0, which is the first point. So what it would effectively do is we would keep removing the 0th index until our line is less than the max length. So if you try and run it, you can see I can keep drawing a line, but it never exceeds the limit set by us, which is 350 pixels. No matter how slow I move or how fast I move, the number of pixels would remain fixed. Now you can see one more problem that I'm not touching the mouse at all. I just left it and I'm moving, but the line that I drew earlier is still there. It needs to go when I am releasing my mouse. So for that, we would add another line in our code. We would add it just below here. I would just add line.clear points here. So whenever our button is pressed or released, it would clear all the points of line. So with our line.clear points in its place, if we run our scene, we can see that our line renders and if I release my mouse, it disappears. As soon as I let go, my line disappears, which is exactly what we want. But there's still one problem. If I just keep on pulling it and if I don't leave my button, you can see the swipe is still present, which I don't want. I want it to be gone when I have swiped and some time has passed. So for that, I need to save at what time exactly was my line created. So let's say I clicked and my point at the start was created at 1 second mark. Then this point was created at 2 second mark and this point was created at let's say 3 second mark. So I could do something like keep only the latest 1 second of the points. So half of the line would disappear. First, let's decide how long each point should stay. For now, I'm using a constant value which is point lifetime and I would set it to 0.2 seconds. You can make this larger if you want the trail longer or smaller if you want to disappear faster. We already have the positions stored inside line 2D. We don't need to store those positions again. But we do need to store the time of creation for each of our line. So after we add our point, we also need to save the time at which it was created. So I would create a array of point times which would store all the times at which the point was created. Now after we have added a point, I would just write below it point times dot append time dot get ticks in milliseconds by 1000, since we want the time to be in seconds, not in milliseconds. You can also see that there is a while loop which also removes a point. So if the point gets added here, it gets added to point times, but if it gets removed here, it should also be removed from our point times. We would also write here pop point times dot pop front, which would just remove its first element as well. Now our times and the points would always be synchronized. Now for our main point, the entire reason why we call this point times. I would write a function process which gets executed every delta time. So I would just basically get the current time and convert it to seconds. Then I would check if my list is not empty, that is its size is greater than 0, so our line actually has at least one point. Then we would simply check if current time minus the time at which our 0th point of the line was created is greater than our point lifetime. So we would do point lifetime dot pop front just as we did in the earlier while loop, and we also need to remove it from the line. And after this if is executed, it would go again in the while loop and it would again check if the next point follows. If it is less than the point lifetime, then we would break the loop and let the execution proceed as normal. So any points that have exceeded our point lifetime would be removed. Now you might also be wondering why we are doing this in process whereas we did everything else in the input. This is because these actions are happening when we are doing specific things with our mouse. So when we are pressing the mouse, we are clearing it or setting the swipe. If we are moving the mouse, we are adding the point or removing them. But even if we are not doing anything, this part should get executed. That is the reason why it is present in the process. Now if I run the scene, you can see my line is creating, and after 0.2 seconds it is slowly coming back to me. It's a nice little effect. If you want it to be more swifter, you could just reduce its time. Currently I think this is fine for me, and we can move to the next part. The next problem that I would address is the line. You can see it looks kinda plain, all white and no effects. So the real swipe would not look like this. It would disappear towards its end a bit. So let's just go ahead and fix that. So instead of using the default color, I would use the fill here, and instead I would use a gradient. I would not do anything fancy. What I would do is just turn its alpha to 0 and color to white. So our oldest point would be completely transparent. That's it. That's all I'm gonna do in the gradient. And you can see how it actually gives some effect to it. It actually feels like the swipe is alive, as the points that are following are kinda ghostly and are slowly disappearing. One more thing that we could fix is that the points at the end should be a bit sharper because the swipe length shouldn't remain same throughout. We could also use our width curve. So in this also I would keep it very simple. I would keep its maximum width at 1 and the minimum at 0. So as our line progresses, its width would gradually decrease. To show this, I could just add 2 points, and if I pull the points, you could see how it gets decreased. Actually, it needs to be reversed. So I would make this thicker and this thinner. And it would even work if you have more points. You could configure it as per your needs. If you want it thicker, I could just keep it here, and you can see the end is quite thick. And if you want the end to be thinner, you could configure it accordingly. So I would just keep it 0. I would also remove the points, and I would run the scene again to see how my swipe looks. Now you can see it's a pretty clean swipe, and it's actually starting to feel really good. Now the final part of the video, we need to add it to our main scene. So let's go back to our main, and inside main I would just instantiate it as a swipe trail. And if I run the scene, you can see I could swipe it, nothing happens yet, but you can see that the gameplay seems kinda effective and it should work. In the next episode, we would actually slice our fruits in the half. Stay tuned and subscribe to get notified for the next video, and see you in the next one.